What is something your parents said to you that may have not been a big deal, but they will never know how much it affected you? When my dad was on his deathbed with pancreatic cancer, he wasn't allowed to talk. He fought and fought with the nurses so that they would let him say one word to my brother and I. He took off his oxygen mask, looked at us both, and said, "Hey." It was hilarious. He was the best. He lay there dying and fought with nurses to give my brother and I a laugh on a day where our world was falling apart. Happy Father's Day, Dad. My dad, when in the ICU a couple of years ago, spent about 5 straight minutes gasping for air just to tell me that he'd had an ultrasound and my mother needed to be informed he wasn't pregnant. I honestly thought he was going to say he wasn't going to make it. I love that Glaswegianer. My dad passed away from cancer a few years ago. During his battle I was his sole caretaker. At 19 I was taking care of him, making sure our bills were paid, getting groceries, cooking, cleaning, setting up appointments, and the million other tasks that come with being someone's caretaker. One day when I returned from running errands, my dad told me he forgot our electric bill was due that day. I casually told him that I had already run a check over while I was out and about. I remember he stopped what he was doing and just turned to look at me and said, "You're going to be just fine when I'm gone." That was heartbreaking to think about, but comforting to know he saw my maturity and ability to handle everyday responsibilities. I hadn't felt I was ready to be on my own, but he helped me realize I would be just fine. 8 years later, and I am doing okay on my own. But man, do I wish he was here. Happy Father Day, Dad. Thank you for sharing such a lovely but difficult story. When I was 12, nearly 13, my mum took me out on a dinner date to talk to me about puberty and how much we might hate each other over the next few years. As part of the evening, she said she had a gift for me. I was pretty super excited. She had teased that it was very special and something I would cherish. So, clearly I thought it would be a Sega Genesis, or maybe a pair of Reebok pumps. 33 years old, still never had a pair and quite pee about it. Instead, she handed me the book Love You Forever. You know, the children's book. On the inside she had written, "To my darling Jake, love Mum. Always remember this. She died yesterday after a 12-year battle with early onset dementia. I'll be getting always remember this tattooed on my arm next week." Traced from her handwriting. I've been reading a bunch of the comments on this post for the last hour or so, and yours was the first one to actually hit a heartstring and bring tears to my eyes. So here I am, a dang near 26-year-old man on the subway with tears in my eyes. She sounds like my mom, and I can't imagine what my life will be like when her time comes. I'm truly sorry to hear about your loss, man. I went to college about 5 hours away from where I grew up, and the first 2 years there I didn't have a car. My dad, who commuted probably 2+ hours a day, I grew up in Northern Virginia every work day for a lot of his working life, drove down 5 hours to come pick me up so that I could come home for some holiday usually. This is when we would have our talks. At the time I was a college sophomore struggling with what direction I wanted to go in terms of major and career. I've always been pretty intellectually capable but never had a career that just beckoned me or made me feel passionate. But I went to college anyway, since that's what you're supposed to do if you have the money and the capability. As an upper middle class millennial I now realize this is not an unusual feeling at all. I ended up majoring in history and anthropology. My dad is a baby boomer who grew up dirt poor and worked at a 7-Eleven to get himself through college and law school. I just remember coming at him with a question about what I should pursue and he put it to me like this: well, there's 2 ways. First, you find something you love to do, or second, find something you love and work to support it. I took this in for a moment and asked which one he did. I did the second one. I asked what he was supporting, with the naivete only a 19-year-old can muster. He chuckled. That just flipped my perspective on everything and made me feel a lot better about being sort of lost. I knew I'd figure it out, and that life would push me where I needed to go when I needed to go there. He's still around. I should tell him. I might not have given birth to you, but you are mine. You were mine from the day I met you. I loved you the second I saw you. Nobody can change that. This came from my stepmother a couple years ago. I met her when I was 13, and I'm almost 21 now. It meant a lot because she was the first strong, consistent mother figure I ever had. She knows that was a nice thing to say, but I don't think she knows quite how much it meant to me. I don't think she will ever know how much I love and respect her for who she is. This is really insignificant but made a big impact on my relationship with my mother. I was about 4. I have a surprising amount of memories from when I was little, and I was coloring on one of those art easels for kids and my mom was cleaning the house. I asked her if I could draw on myself and she surprisingly said yes. So of course I took my markers and just went to town coloring my arms and stomach and legs. She came into the room to find me and flipped out that I had done this. I thought I was in big trouble so I started crying and I said, "But you told me I could," to which she responded, "You're right, I did. I thought you meant on the paper though. That was my fault. Let's get you cleaned up." And I wasn't in trouble at all. That was the day I realized adults aren't just there to punish you and that my mom was fair and understanding. But to this day that's one of my favorite qualities of my mom and makes for a solid relationship. Parents actually owning up to their mistakes and saying sorry is really important for a child. When I was little and my mother was still alive, her and my father seemed to always be getting into fights. Even after she was diagnosed with cancer, gone through multiple surgeries, and fought back her estimated date of death 5 years, was essentially brain dead, and died, my father still harassed her, besides calling her a stupid bee and saying he hoped she would just die already. One memory of him really stuck with me. One time during the summer, we had a storm and the power went out. My mother had just begun to enter her final stage of life, and was on an oxygen machine and bedridden. She was unable to move, hear, see, or smell, but if she was conscious, she could still feel us. My father turned on the generator, but sent power to our basement, where he always smoked. Confused, we asked him why our mother's oxygen machine wasn't powered. "We have oxygen tanks, so I may as well enjoy myself." We had one oxygen tank, with hardly enough air for 2 hours. It was for emergencies such as moving her to a hospital, not wait for the power to come one, which, living in the country, would take days sometimes. But the line that makes me look in the mirror every day and do reality checks is before my mother was even diagnosed. I was 5, and at this point, I wasn't aware of all the fighting. I remember my mother walked into my room one day and sat down on the bed with me. She asked me what I was doing, and I was playing Pokemon Fire Red, the first video game she got me. She held my hand, said that she loved me. Awesomeizer 20. Please don't ever be like your father. Please respect women and love your children. Know that I may not always be around, but I will always love you and support you. Even if I think you're wrong, I'll help you. But please, be different than your father. As she lost her speech, the last word she spoke was to me. I walked out of the kitchen through her room to say goodnight. It was 12 AM. She grabbed my hand and lipped sit down. I held her hand for what felt like an eternity when she finally managed to say the first thing in 3 days, and the last thing in her life. "I feel so bad for you. I'm so sorry I'm leaving. I love you, Mom." This broke my heart. Your mom loved you very much. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm a high-strung person, but when I was a child, my dad looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Be like the swan. They glide through the water and look calm and cool, but if you were to look below you'd see their feet frantically kicking. Don't let them see you sweat, but work hard." I didn't think it made an impact, but people tell me often that I come off very organized and calm while inside my inner monologue is a constant scream. Thanks, Dad. "Be good to each other" was the last thing my father said to my mother and I before he went into the surgery from which he would eventually die. I think he meant for my mother and I to be good to each other, but I try to remember this every day and apply it to every interaction I have with people. My father was the salt of the earth, a selfless man who was the perfect example of how to treat others, and I can only hope to lead my life based on his actions and words. That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing. It's so important to be kind with everyone around us, even those we don't know. I have a good one. One of my first memories was the time I lied to my mom about something. She patiently explained why it was not good to lie and something people should never do. Later that evening the phone rang and my big sister ran to answer. My mom was watching TV or something and called from the other room, if that is name I forgot. Tell her I am at the store. That was a bit of a WTF moment for me. The moment you discover your parents' hypocrisy can be devastating. When I was decently young we saw this movie about a magic toy maker or something. Not sure what it was called. But one of the plot elements was that he was like 300 years old and that when he was young he bought several pair of leather shoes enough to last him his whole life, and every time he wore through the sole on a pair he took out another one and he was apparently on his last pair. So towards the end of the movie he gets sick and is in the hospital and the camera pans out to the foot of his bed where you see the bottoms of his shoes and the soles are completely worn through, and so he dies soon. Anyway, a couple weeks later I had gone to a basketball game with my dad and noticed on the back of the ticket there was a coupon for a free gallon of windshield wiper fluid if our team won. And I wanted to go claim our free gallons, but my dad said he had enough windshield wiper fluid to last the rest of his life. And after he said that I went upstairs and started crying. Not because I thought his life was actually tied to wiper fluid, but because it was the first time I had really considered my parents' mortality. And I hated the thought that they would die someday. Probably seemed like a really innocent thing to say, and it was. But I feel like realizing your parents are immortal is a big moment in your childhood. The movie is Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium. The shoe thing freaks me up. It wasn't actually anything that she said. My mom had breast cancer when I was a kid. I mean, it's breast cancer though, so there was always an overlying feeling of we'll get through this. Its success rate is so high, but of course it's still scary. When my mom started going through chemotherapy, I kept asking her how she still had so much hair, because even at 10 years old I knew what was supposed to happen. She just kept brushing it off as her dad's thick hair gains. Probably a month or two through, I woke up for school one morning, which was very unusual for me. My mom always woke me up, and it was still pretty early, so I decided to do something nice for her and make her some coffee, eggs and toast. Right when I opened the door I saw her facing a mirror drawing on eyebrows and I nearly dropped everything I had because she was entirely bald, pale, thin, bruised. My mom turned around shocked to see me and I couldn't take it. I set the food down on the floor and ran away like a stupid kid, and heard my mom start crying. I ran back up and apologized and said I was just startled. It took me a bit to realize that she was going out of her way each morning, getting up an hour before she normally had to just to protect me from what the cancer was doing to her. She didn't want me to see that side. After that realization, I can't help but love my mother so much more. I love you, Mom. I'm gonna go call my mom now. She's awesome. 2 incidents where the response was the same. I was probably 12 and tried to cook for the first time. I burned my eggs and I was expecting my dad to be angry that I had wasted food. But he casually threw it in the trash and said, "It's alright, just try again." I learned that sometimes you have to make mistakes to succeed. Another one was when I was probably 14. I was a bit hyper and heavily into martial arts. I was in the kitchen and doing kicks when I lost balance and knocked a glass off the counter. Felt really embarrassed and again thought that my dad would be upset, but he just asked me if I had stepped into any splinters and then cleaned up my mess. He doesn't remember any of this, but it's strange how often I go back to those moments when someone messed up and I try to be calm and understanding. Your life is like a bus. People will get on. People will get off. Some people will stay on forever. Other people will be there for a short time and then leave. And sometimes you just need to kick someone off your bus. I needed this. On the subject of jobs, just remember, you don't have to be a farmer to be outstanding in your field. Guess which parent it was? When I was small, my mom and I would read together every night before bed. One night when I was maybe 5, we read a new book, I'll Love You Forever. It's written from the mom's point of view as her kid grows up and does exasperating things, ruins her favorite watch, stays out late with friends, etc. Each time, the mom says, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living. My baby you'll be." The last page is written from the adult son's point of view as he gently takes care of his senior mother. And he says the same thing his mom always said, but says mommy instead of baby. My mom cried reading it to me, and I didn't understand why until I got older and realized she was imagining all the stages of life she would go through with me and my brothers. I'm an adult now, and thinking of it still makes me teary-eyed. I've never gotten through that book without bawling. Ever. Edit. My highest rated comment ever is about crying over a kid's book. Seems like my life. My Mill and I were having a normal conversation and she said this casually. "My son never used to smile in pictures and now he does. You make my son smile." And then she moved on to the next thing. I think it was the highest compliment she could ever give me. When I was pretty young, my mom once told me never feel embarrassed about asking for a ride home in regards to not being sober enough to drive. Years later, I'm leaving a friend's house and I make it about 1 block before I can literally hear my mom's voice in my head as I'm driving and thinking to myself, "Man, I don't want to call my BF to come get me." After I told him I wouldn't need a ride, immediately pulled over and called him. 10/10 would do it again. My mother died of cancer when I was about 12. She had fought for a long time and finally reached the point where we had to come to terms that she was going to die. She was supposed to go into hospice care, so I didn't know that when I visited her in the hospital it would be the last time I would talk to her. The last thing she said to me was when I was getting a haircut. I spent the night at a close family friend's house that night. My friend's father woke me up late at night and told me my mom had passed. He and my father were both there when she passed. He said she had him promise that he would look after me and my father. Her final words were, "Tell my father and me I will always love them." It really impacted me. My mother was in pain, dying of cancer, and she spent her last moments worried about my father and I. Since then, I've tried to live that selflessness out in my own life. I try to make her proud every day. Don't compare yourself to your sister. You two are both amazing in your own right. I struggled with living in the shadow of my sister's academic prowess. All the teachers knew who she was and expected me to be the carbon copy of her. I put so much pressure on myself to be just as good, and my mom saw me struggling and said this to me one day. It took a while, but I finally realized that I am my own person with qualities that are unique to me and make me a good person. When I was like 4 years old, my mum told me that if you don't pull out a splinter, it travels in and pierces your organs and you die. Whenever I went near splintery wood, I got terrified I was going to get a splinter and not find out until my organs explode. Right about when my hormones started kicking in at age 11, I started crying because my mom told me the splinter in my finger might get loose and travel to my brain. I wasn't upset over that fear, but rather that my mom could be so insensitive about such a dire situation and let me go to bed with this in my finger. Hormones are, like, so weird. You told me you wanted a cookie. When I was about 15, my mother went to Tim Hortons and I gave her some change and asked her to bring me back a bagel. She brought back a cookie instead and told me that's what I said to get. I locked myself in my room and cried harder than I think I've ever cried before in my life. Because the day before it was "I didn't scream and swear at you earlier, I have no idea what you're talking about." The week before it was "I have never hit you, but if you're so convinced it happened, let's just call CPS and have them take you away to a foster family who will beat you for real." The week before that it was "I didn't push you down the stairs. I barely even tapped you and then you just fell. etc etc." At this point it had been about 4 years of her flying into rages and then trying to convince me it never happened. The cookie broke me. The fact that she still felt the need to lie and pin the blame on me even over something as inconsequential as getting my order wrong was just too much for me to handle. I still get upset thinking about it. Like, yeah, obviously all the serious stuff was terrible, but the fact that she couldn't just admit to something as minor as getting me the wrong snack, that's freaked up on a whole other level, in my eyes at least. Something my dad told me that's always stuck with me. Once we were driving to pick up my stepmom. I was around 11 or 12. For reference, my dad used to be a bank manager before he retired. He told me about a customer he had a few years back that had immigrated to Canada, and after working several different jobs he decided he wanted to open his own business. Now, according to my dad, this guy's credit wasn't super stellar, but it wasn't awful, but his business idea was considered high risk. My dad told the man the bank couldn't give him a loan and the guy was distraught. He begged and pleaded, swearing up and down he would be successful and pay back the money. Now this was back before everything was done with computers and your loan was actually accepted or denied by a person. So my dad told the man he'd do what he could. Couple days later my dad called the man and told him he approved the loan, and the man was ecstatic. Fast forward a few years and the man's business is booming, as well as several others he started up. He's one of the bank's best customers. After telling me this story, he pulls the car over and looks me in eyes and says I approved that man because I saw something in him. He had what you call good character, and having good character is more important than money. Your dad is a good human being. My mother said something to me when we were getting her passport renewed. This was in June 2016. The option was for a 5 or a 10-year renewal. I checked off 10 years and she just chuckled and told me not to waste my money. I asked her why. She said, "I'm 77 years old." She passed away 4 months later. My mother was debating whether to get a brand new car or a second-hand one. I said to her, "It's probably going to be the last car you get, so it should be brand new so you can enjoy it and rely on it." She's 71. But still, pretty stupid of me to needlessly remind her of her mortality. Kicks self. Never underestimate how much a dollar can buy, so be careful with your money. I'm now the type of person Frugal jerk makes fun of. Lentils. Grew up in a violent, abusive family. Dad was an alcoholic and beat mum. Mum in turn, emotionally and physically beat us. I was constantly compared to my cousin who was prettier and smarter than me, and who hit puberty first, so she was more womanly while I stayed an awkward tomboy. I was 8 years old and I walked into my mother screaming, "Call the police. Help." I ran upstairs and my mother was screaming he tried to strangle me. Verbal abusivocate. Call the police while my dad screamed, "Don't listen to her. She tried to hit me in the head." I was extremely confused and just burst into tears. When my dad stormed out to go to the pub, my mum looked at me in disgust and spat. "Your cousin would have called the police on him. I wish she was my daughter instead." It's probably one of the most hurtful things anyone has ever said to me. It absolutely disgusts me that anyone would treat their children like that. I'm so sorry you were raised by those monsters. I hope you're doing better now. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.